These creatures are said to change shape, either to hunt down their prey or to escape. But sometimes it seems they change forms simply to haunt people like you and me. If only I could shapeshift, then I could fly into the sky as a bird and accomplish my ultimate destiny, getting hit by an airplane. These are 5 allegedly real encounters with shape-shifting creatures. And hey, if you like what I do, please like this video. It's quick, easy, and it really helps out. Thank you. Now, let's begin. This experience took place in 2017 during my first year of college. I attended a large university in New Mexico for my first year of college. It was nearly on the other side of the country from where I lived. I was fortunate enough that my grandpa allowed me and my mother to live in his winter vacation home while I attended school. The city where I went to college is one of the larger ones in the state, and it's well known for its unique mountain range that several years ago became a national monument. My grandpa's house was outside the city, set fairly close to the base of the mountains. It was a good 15-minute drive from the house to the edge of the city. There are no streetlights after the edge of the city. Cell reception is spotty too at best, and the only traffic that comes that way are people who live that far out. Not to mention the drive from the city's edge to my grandfather's house is 15 minutes through empty desert. It's very beautiful, but also very, very remote. As a college student, there wasn't a whole lot to do outside of classes, but one thing that was pretty popular if you liked the outdoors and didn't mind dodging cactus, large insects, and the occasional rattlesnake was hiking. One afternoon, I was driving up to the base of the mountains to meet a friend for a hike. The road to the trailhead is unpaved with a lot of twists and turns, and it's very badly washboarded. These turns and dips in the road make it impossible to see very far down the road. That day, I was about a third of the way down the dirt road when I came around a particularly large turn, and there, standing right at the edge of the road, was a very large dog. The dog looked somewhat like an Australian shepherd. It had similar coloring and no tail. It was just standing there, staring right at me through the front windshield. Now, we were a good 5+ miles away from a house in any direction, so I thought it was pretty weird to see a dog all alone way out here. There was nothing but desert surrounding us for miles. No shade, no water, nowhere to find shelter, nothing. So, being a huge animal lover, I pulled over a little ways up the road, grabbing my dog's spare leash that I kept in the car. Then I climbed out to try and find that dog. I figured maybe it had a collar, so I'd be able to possibly bring it back to its family if it let me approach. When I exited the car, I was surprised to see that the dog was now a very good distance off the road and into the brush. How it had gotten that far so quickly and without making a sound was beyond me, but it was still staring right at me. I began to walk towards it, calling out as I did. "Come here, sweetie. It's okay." The dog waited until I was about halfway towards it before turning and running further into the desert. Probably very stupidly, I decided to follow after it. Now, when you look out over a low desert landscape, it appears to be flat. Anyone who has lived in the Southwest can tell you that that is not necessarily true. Flash floods and high winds carve out the sand, making small dips and mounds. Walking across the desert for any distance longer than several paces can, in certain areas, be quite tedious. The land that I was walking over to try and get to this dog was like this. Moving forward was slow, and it was more of a hike as I got snagged on branches and large thorns from the plants around me. I called out again to the dog. It turned and looked at me over its shoulder. We did this start and stop thing for a little while, and every time the dog stopped, it would watch me as I continued to stumble and trudge through the rocks and brush towards it. This went on until, finally, I was able to get close enough to the dog to see that its eyes were yellow. Yellow. This made me stop and blink, trying to make sense of what I was looking at. When I did, I realized that I was now dangerously far away from the road and my car. I'd gone much further into the desert than I should have. I may not have been able to make my way back. I was supposed to be meeting my friend, so I checked my phone and realized I was close to being late too. I called the dog one last time, and again it ignored me. So I turned and stumbled back to my car. I stopped a few times to look back, and every time I did, the dog was still staring at me, It took me a good 15 minutes to get back to the car, and when I finally did and began to drive away, I looked back in my rearview mirror and was startled to see the dog standing in the middle of the road, watching me drive away. How the heck had it gotten there so fast? It would have had to run at full speed over the rocks and plants, and I would have definitely heard that. By the time I made it up the mountain to the trailhead to meet my friend, I was still deeply shaken by this encounter. I was relieved to see my friend when he arrived. When I got home, I told my mom about the weird dog. I could tell she didn't fully believe me. She asked me to describe it. I did, and she asked if I was sure it wasn't just a coyote. I insisted that it was a dog, for sure, and she said it sounded more like a coyote and that it's never a good idea to go following wild animals into the desert. About a week later, I had forgotten about this weird encounter and was driving into the city down the one main road in the desert housing community when I saw the same dog. It was the same dog. I was sure of it, scruffy, looking like it needed a bath and a good brushing, no tail. It was standing on the shoulder of the opposite side of the road, exactly like it had been the first time I saw it. Now, this really freaked me out, because we were a good 20-minute car ride from the location that I'd first seen it all. None of the other cars seemed to notice the dog, which was really weird. It was a very large dog after all, looked to be about 85 pounds. But what really scared me was that when I got about 100 yards away from the dog, I realized that it was staring at my car. As I drove past, its head moved so that its gaze followed me. And as I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw the dog was still staring at me. The same thing happened again on the same road several weeks later. Things were quiet after that for a little while. About a month after the second time, my father flew in from home to visit for Thanksgiving. One night at around 9:30, when Mom and Dad were already in bed, I got up to wash my face and put my hair up before going to bed myself. Now, my bedroom was at the back of the house, and the bathroom was at the front, right by the front door. About 4 large steps away from the front door, to be exact. To get to the bathroom, I had to walk down the hall and past my parents' bedroom. I had just rounded the turn in the hallway. It was a few paces from the bathroom when I heard and saw the doorknob of the front door shake and jiggle as if someone on the other side was turning it, trying to get in. I froze. It felt like an eternity, but I couldn't move. I couldn't think. It was like I was frozen to the spot. Now, when you walk into my grandpa's house, you walk right into the dining room. The side of the dining room has a floor-to-ceiling window that is right next to the front door. The window is actually 2 separate windows, a large one that is placed like a normal window, and a small short one that sits underneath that and starts a couple of inches above the floor and goes up about a foot. Both of these windows have blinds, and on this night, the blinds were closed on both. I figured that if I could get up the courage to walk past the front door, I would be able to peek out the lower window and see if there was someone standing at the door without them seeing me seeing them. Ever so slowly, after the doorknob stopped rattling, I inched past the door, turned on the porch light, and moved to the window. There was no noise now, but the house was surrounded by gravel, so if the person had moved or left, I would have heard them. Crouching down, I knelt so that my face was level with the lower window, and I held my breath, hands on the blinds, ready to look out. I braced myself to see someone's ankles. Ever so slowly, I lifted one blind and peeked out. What I saw will forever be burned in my mind, and it still haunts me. Standing on the doorstep was a black cat with huge yellow eyes, and it was right on the other side of the glass, face to face with me, staring right into my eyes. I shrieked and fell back, dropping the blind. I ran, half crying, half gasping for air, into my parents' bedroom. I dragged my mom, who was still half asleep, to the window and opened the blinds. The cat was gone. We opened the blinds of both windows all the way, and there was nothing there. My mom tried to open the front door, but half sobbing, half shrieking, I would not let her. I could tell my mom still didn't fully believe me. How could a cat have reached the doorknob? It was a large cat, sure, but even standing up on its back legs, it wouldn't have been able to reach the doorknob. But the cat had been the only thing outside, and I know I saw the doorknob shake. and it was like the cat had known the exact place that I would be peeking out of. It had been face to face with me when I opened the blinds. The most disturbing part about this encounter was that I didn't realize until the morning afterwards that both the dog and that cat had the same overly large, piercing yellow eyes. Now, we've owned animals, and I've been around them my entire life. I've never seen a cat or a dog with that color of yellow in their eyes. Not before and not since. They didn't glow exactly, but they seemed to have their own light from within. I still don't know what it was I saw out there in the desert, but when I told a native friend years later, he got very nervous and said that it was good that I didn't go after it again. Ever since I was a child, I've been terrified of werewolves, and wolves too, especially movies about them. And as a kid, I was crazy enough to watch them. I would cover my eyes whenever I knew the scary wolf was going to appear. So this obviously gave me terrible nightmares for most of my life. It was a Friday on Halloween night, my favorite holiday. At the time, I worked as an English teacher in a company I always thought didn't appreciate me. On that night, I was planning to watch a horror film marathon, like I did every year. But this time around, I was thinking about watching a werewolf movie, and one of my coworkers recommended me an old movie called An American Werewolf in London. It sounded scary, and I really wanted to face my fears and give it a shot. On that day, I was excited. I had already bought candy for trick-or-treaters and some beer for me. I wished I didn't have to work until 5 p.m. though. As soon as I got off work, I took my things and left my office. I drove my car home, which I called the Batmobile, to execute my plans. I listened to Thriller on the way there, which I always loved listening to on Halloween night. I got home around 7 p.m. or so, took my beer to the fridge, drank a long sip, and heard the door ring, which scared me for a second. But then I heard trick or treat behind the door, so I opened up, complimented the kids' cool costumes, and gave them candy. The trick-or-treaters kept visiting me until 8 p.m., and all the while I listened to heavy metal and ate some ramen for dinner. After that, I grabbed my laptop and watched my horror movie, Marathon. I left American Werewolf in London for last. I sometimes had to pause to grab another beer. Should it be known that that movie scared the crap out of me, but I still thought it was a great movie. I was 6 beers in and decided to go to sleep. That night, I had a terrible nightmare where I had to run away from a werewolf in a dark, foggy, and creepy forest, which was lit by the full moon. In my dreams, I was screaming my lungs out. I felt extremely disoriented and terrified of the huge, bulky, black shape that was the werewolf chasing after me. I ran for my life for what seemed like hours, but I felt the beast closing in on me. I turned around several times, and all I could see was its dark silhouette. Bright red eyes and yellow teeth bared at me. I screamed again and ran a bit faster. Out of the blue, I came across a huge fallen tree that blocked my way. I had no choice but to jump over it. I could hear the werewolf growling and panting behind me. It jumped the tree too. While I was still mid-air, I felt a sharp pain on my back, and I woke up suddenly. Then I jumped out of my bed from fright, hitting my body against the floor. I cursed and rubbed my eyes. I stood up, when out of nowhere, I felt a sudden and deep pain on my back, exactly the same spot from the dream. I tried reaching for the place where I felt it, but couldn't, so I went to the bathroom to wash my face, get some water, and look at myself in the mirror. I turned around, and to my horror, there were 5 bloody gashes on my back. I jumped forward and yelled, wondering, what is that? I went to the hospital and got my wound patched up. When asked what happened by the doctor, I told them that my cat scratched me. They obviously didn't believe it, and I didn't even own a cat. To this day, I still ask myself, was it just a crazy dream, or did my terrified mind somehow make it a reality? The truth to the matter is, I never watched another werewolf movie again. I was horrified at the thought of having another nightmare as vivid as that one. After being attacked in my nightmare, I'm scared that the werewolf in my dream was quite real. And I don't want to go back. I am a 23-year-old girl who had quite the encounter 3 years ago on some back roads of Cahokia, Illinois. One night, I was having a bad day, so I hit up a buddy named B. B swooped by, and we went on a late-night road trip. We made it to these crossroads. On one side, there's nothing but fields and a little abandoned church. Legend has it, many years ago, the pastor of that church supposedly killed his wife and children, then himself, inside the church. On the other side of the crossroads is a little bit of field and a decent house and sized patch of woods. There's another church with a parking lot there. B and I ventured out behind that church, facing the patch of woods. We stayed in the car for a while, talking about each other's days. At a certain point, I looked up out of the windshield and I saw an 8 to 9 foot tall being. And horrifically, it was your textbook image of an upright werewolf. It was massive, easily larger than Andre the Giant. It was black, covered with hair. The ears were tall and pointed, similar to a German shepherd. The eyes were reflecting or glowing orange-red. Its hands, or rather claws, were huge. The head on this thing was large as well, ending in a long snout. I couldn't stop staring at it until I rubbed my eyes, trying to be sure that I wasn't seeing things. As I sat there, bewildered and horrified, the creature looked back, showing its teeth to us in a way that should have been a threat, but appeared more like a smile. Its teeth looked like they could tear through you as if you were butter. I nudged B, letting him know that we needed to leave. He looked at me, asking why. Then he followed my gaze, which never left that thing. B yelled. He backed out of the parking lot, like a bat out of heck. We hit the road, and I looked out the side mirror. I saw it standing there in the middle of the road, on 2 legs, watching us drive away. I could still see that smile on its face. As we put more distance between us and that thing, we suddenly hear a blood-chilling howl. It reminded me a lot of the werewolf from the movie Van Helsing, the one he turns into when he fights Dracula towards the end. I'm just glad we were able to get away before it decided to make us its next meal. Well, what can I say? It's another skinwalker story. Personally, I keep an eye and ear out for paranormal activity, so if something comes along my way, eventually I won't be surprised. This particular account is about a friend of mine. I'll call her M. I recall talking to her about a certain camping trip she went on in Colorado about 2 years ago. I wasn't there myself, but I remember her coming back from that trip. What struck me as odd was that 1, she came back later than her friends did, and 2, she was very hesitant on telling me what happened on the trip. Eventually, she spilled the beans on her account of a skinwalker. When she told me the story, I was very shocked. I asked her friends that went with her on the trip about the topic, and they too had a bit of a story to tell. Nothing as extreme as M's account, though. I haven't thought about it until it was brought up to me by my twin brother. He got M to tell him the story too. We talked about it for a while, and after that conversation, I thought it was time, with M's permission of course, to share the tale of M, the medicine man, and the skinwalker. Like I said, it was about 2 years ago. M's spring break was coming up at the time. Her friend, whom me and my twin call Trigger Happy, invited M to a week-long hiking trip in Colorado. She accepted the invitation and took all the necessary preparations. M, Trigger Happy, and 3 more friends accompanying them left on the Friday before the official week of the spring break. Since M, me, and everyone I have mentioned so far lives in Michigan, they had to fly to Colorado. They then rented a Jeep car and stayed at a cheap motel not too far from the airport. On Saturday, they drove to their destination, unloaded the hiking and camping gear, and hiked a short distance to a good camping spot. The first 3 nights were rather uneventful, M said in her own words. She said that only Trigger Happy and one of the other friends had experience in overnight hiking trips, so they moved slowly through the woods. On the 4th day during the late evening, the group heard what they thought were just animal noises. However, Trigger Happy informed the group that they didn't think those were normal animal noises. The group began to listen intently, and they too realized the unnatural characteristics of the noises. M described them as a man trying to imitate a coyote howl or bark, but the attempt was very close to the actual sound of one. The noises eventually stopped, and they finally retired for the night. On the last night of their planned trip, the skinwalker appeared. That evening they were enjoying a campfire when one of the friends noticed a pair of amber eyes peering at them through the darkness of the trees. The group went silent and stared at the eyes. Then it showed itself. It slowly walked out of the trees on hind legs and entered their field of vision. M described it as a tall, nearly bone-thin, zombie coyote humanoid. That's all she had to say about it. I knew what she saw was a skinwalker. That description was all I needed to know. The skinwalker walked around the group at a slow pace. The group was frozen in fear. No one dared to move. The skinwalker was behind Trigger Happy when it suddenly snapped its head towards M. It then smiled a broad and evil smile and began to walk towards her. M remembered Trigger Happy's face turning from fear to anger. He stood up, grabbing the closest throwable item. In this case, it happened to be a hand-sized stone, and tossed it at the skinwalker. It landed straight in the back of its head. The skinwalker turned and gave Trigger Happy an unsettling snarl and somewhat of a roar that resembled a bark. Trigger Happy looked back at it with a challenging stare. The creature snapped its head at him, then Trigger Happy, then bolted into the darkness of the forest. The group packed up their gear and went to the car as quickly as they could. After some time, they made it to the car. They then packed everything as quickly as possible and drove down the road to the nearest town. Trigger Happy was driving, and M was in the front passenger seat. She recalled thinking about the skinwalker's smile and those glowing amber eyes it had. Suddenly, the car came to a halt. M looked over at Trigger Happy and saw that he was looking at something in the road with great fear in his eyes. M didn't bother looking. She knew that the skinwalker had blocked the road. Now, remember when I told you that the story shocked me? It was because of how extreme this part was. Again, this is not my story, so if you don't believe it, that's fine. I'm just telling the story the way M told it to me. Even I'm not sure whether to believe it or not. The skinwalker had blocked the road. What M did not expect to happen was when the skinwalker walked to the side of the car and ripped the door right off its hinges. It cut through M's seatbelt and grabbed M's arm. Before it could drag M out, Trigger Happy grabbed onto her arm. M basically became the center of a tug of war. The remaining friends were frozen in fear, watching this terrifying struggle between man and beast. After what seemed like ages, Trigger Happy could not hold on anymore and let go. M was then being dragged into the forest, helplessly, as she looked desperately back to Trigger Happy and the rest of her friends. When she could no longer see them, she felt she was going to die. Then a feeling came upon her. She described it to me as a feeling of determination, that she couldn't let it end here. She managed to get her arm free of the skinwalker after some intense struggling. She then ran off into the direction that she thought her friends were in. After some time of running, the skinwalker caught up to her, and she remembered being knocked off her feet. She turned to see it pacing towards her. Feeling a fallen branch under her hand, she swung it at the creature's head, causing it to stumble backwards. She dropped the branch and ran away. She didn't care where. All she wanted to do was get away from it. After some time of running, she stumbled across a cabin with lights on the inside. She ran to it, pounding on the door and screaming for help. M told me that before she could call for help again, she ran out of breath from her being so tired after running for so long. Fortunately, a Native American man answered the door, asking what she was doing there so late at night. His question was quite calm, though. M remembered the man being older. He was wearing tribal clothing and had a wise, calming, and powerful face. She explained that she needed help, that there was something after her. He asked what it could be. The man sounded genuinely concerned. M then heard the same snarl and a roaring, bark-like sound, just as she had heard earlier that night. When she turned around, the skinwalker was there, and the man said in a dark voice, "Ye not loose ye eye?" The man commanded her to get inside while basically forcing her in. She remembered standing in the stranger's cabin, listening to him speak in an unknown language to her. Then she heard the skinwalker do the snarl and roar bark thing again, which was soon followed by the man shouting an unknown phrase. His shouting was so powerful that it made M jump. Minutes later, the man walked inside and put his hands on M's shoulders. He then told her that everything would be fine and that the creature was now gone. She asked him what it was. He told her that it was what they called a skinwalker. M was then allowed to use the man's phone to call for Trigger Happy, letting him know that she was fine and that they needed to go home without her. The situation was explained more thoroughly, and eventually Trigger Happy did what M asked. M stayed at the medicine man's house for the night and the next night. During the time M stayed there, she said that she had been blessed by the great spirits to protect her in the future. She didn't go into more detail. After her time with the medicine man, he drove her to the nearest airport, bought her a ticket to the earliest flight to Michigan, then prayed over her one last time. And that's the story M told me. When I think about it, there is some rather interesting coincidences that happened in the story, like how Trigger Happy had an item so quickly to attack the skinwalker with, how M coincidentally ran into a medicine man at the exact right time and place. Even so, all stories have a right to be shared. And every skinwalker account has the ability to teach the world a little more about the creature's legend and mysteries. The impundulu is a shape-shifting bird that is said to create lightning storms at random, and it is known to attack humans. As for me, I am a 6'2" guy and have seen some of the worst opine. As for me, I am a 6'2" guy and have seen some of the world's oddest forms of life up to that point. I was actually in Africa to collect samples for a survey of the climate over there. I was in a bit of a jungle when in the middle of my work, a thunderstorm was brewing up. This caught me off guard since there were no reports of any thunderstorms in the area, and our instruments gave no indication of the sort. I didn't mind it, though. The jungles there can be quite humid and tend to have a lot of rain and thunderstorms due to that. I took cover under a tree, considering myself lucky that it didn't get struck by lightning and I didn't get electrocuted. During the middle of the thunderstorm, I glanced up at the sky, and I see this bird, which is about the same size as me, which would have been extremely odd or nearly impossible out in this region of Africa. Once I locked eyes with its stone-cold pupils, I realized I made a huge mistake on my part. I should have avoided seeing me at all costs. This utterly massive bird then swooped in on me, barely missing me, but still giving me some good gashes on my shoulder. I fought back against this bird, but it being about the same size and weight class as a grown man, it was like trying to fend off a flying thug, one that outweighed me. It then let out an ear-piercing screech, swooping in for another attack. I duck in a panic, thinking that I'm about to die, but the bird only scrapes me on the back, which gives me the chance to escape while it circled back for another blow. By then, I'd already run out of there, finding cover in which to hide so that the bird could no longer attack me. Running from hiding place to hiding place until I made it back to my team's trailer, I was then driven to a hospital. Luckily, after some stitches, I was fine. If this wasn't the legendary impandulu, then I have no earthly idea what it was at all, but to me it makes sense. It came along with the thunderstorm, it was bigger than should be possible for a flying bird, and it nearly took my life. Well then, I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Scary Stories and Shape-Shifting Monsters. And if you want to help me out, leave a like on this video, share it with your friends and family. Remember, stay safe out there, and stay creepy.